Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a world where the cold doesn't just nip at your fingers, it stalks you like a hungry animal. You push open a crooked wooden door, and the wind slices through you hard enough to make you gasp. Snowflakes drift sideways, the kind that sting your face like tiny thrown pebbles, and as you look around, you realize something strange. The woodpile beside this tiny medieval cottage is almost empty, even though it's the dead of winter, and the temperature is hovering somewhere around 30 degrees Fahrenheit. You would think people here would be burning logs like crazy, but no firewood is nearly gone. And trust me, you probably won't survive this if you're relying on it. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I always love reading those. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step forward into the cold, your boots crunching over frozen mud. The houses around you huddle close together like frightened animals, their roofs sagging under piles of snow that haven't melted in weeks. Your breath comes out in long, shaky clouds, and you pull your cloak tighter even though, let's be honest, it's already stiff from frost. You glance again at that woodpile. 3 logs, maybe 4. Definitely not more than a night's worth if you were living in the modern world. But medieval peasants, they stretch that tiny stack like magicians pulling scarves out of a hat. A mainstream historical fact slides into your mind, the kind your high school textbook mentioned once but never explained. Most medieval European land was already under heavy pressure from deforestation, and chopping down trees wasn't free. Lords controlled forests, and using them without permission could get you fined, beaten, or strongly encouraged to rethink your life choices. That's why villagers walked around with a constant calculation in their heads. Can I spare one more log? Can I risk lighting the hearth early? Will the smoke get me in trouble with the reeve? Your fingers tighten around a bundle of reeds you picked up earlier, one of the many strange fuels people used instead of wood. You didn't think you'd be carrying those today, but here we are. Wind rattles the shutters of a nearby house, and you hear coughing from inside. Not the light oops, swallowed wrong air kind of cough, no. This is the deep, smoky, chest-rattling kind that comes from living your whole winter next to a fire that can't afford to be strong enough to burn cleanly. A quirky little tidbit so many people don't realize. A smoky house was a sign of poverty, not poor craftsmanship. If your chimney drew too well, your heat escaped. So villagers often preferred, well, marinating themselves in indoor smoke. Delicious. Historians still argue whether people in these climates grew smoke-resistant over generations, or were simply tough in the way people become tough when they're constantly bullied by the weather. But you're still coughing 30 seconds in. Congratulations, you're one of them now. You keep walking, passing a few bundled figures carrying bundles of... Wait, is that dried seaweed? You blink. It is. Anything that burns even a little becomes treasure when the world outside wants you to become a peasant-flavored ice sculpture. Even the word firewood means something different here, more like fuelish, wood-like, burnable-ish stuff. But your attention keeps drifting back to that first house and that first tiny woodpile. You can't let it go. It's weird. It's wrong. It's like seeing someone set out a single slice of bread for a whole family. So you step inside the cottage, careful not to let too much warm air escape, though. Honestly, warm is doing some very heavy lifting here. A thin ribbon of smoke drifts upward into the rafters and hangs there like an indecisive ghost. You can see your breath even inside. A woman sits by the hearth, turning some small, dark bricks in her hands. They look like the world's saddest brownies, but they're not food, they're peat, cut from bogs in the summer and dried on racks until they're hard enough to burn. You'll get your own section of that later. But right now, you're mostly struck by how everything here feels like a negotiation with nature. She tosses one peat brick onto the embers. It doesn't burst into flame. Instead, it sighs, slumps, and slowly begins to smolder. The room warms by, maybe 1 degree. But that single degree means fingers stay flexible, and toes frostbite a little slower. A child nearby is rubbing his hands together briskly, trying to warm them. You look down and notice the floor is frozen in places. Thin sheets of ice creeping toward the hearth like little silver veins. You sit beside the fire, It's not a cozy, crackling symbol of comfort like the one in modern holiday movies. It's a tired, hard-working little glow fighting a battle it's not exactly winning. And yet, despite the weakness of the flames, you feel a strange sense of connection. This is survival in its rawest, simplest form. Using what you have, burning what you can, saving everything possible for later, because winter is long and mercy is rare. Outside, the wind howls again, rattling the shutters so hard you worry they'll snap. You breathe in the heavy, earthy scent of peat and smoke. You blink, your eyes watering, and you pull your cloak tighter. The night is long, the cold is cruel, and the woodpile is empty. But you're inside. You're with them. And now the story of what medieval peasants really burned to survive the strange, clever, sometimes shocking fuels that kept them alive begins to unfold around you. You stay inside that cramped, smoky cottage for a few more minutes, letting your eyes adjust to the dimness. But eventually you have to step back out into the night, because the next part of the story waits beyond that door, out in fields that look deceptively calm beneath their heavy white blankets. When you step outside, the wind hits you like you've said something rude about its mother. Your cloak snaps behind you, and every breath you take feels like sipping tiny, icy needles. Now you understand why that tiny woodpile looks so pitiful. Firewood, actual, honest, tree-grown firewood, had become a luxury item in many regions of medieval Europe. It wasn't that people were too lazy to gather it, or too clueless to manage forests. No, the problem was that the forests themselves were shrinking faster than anyone could replace them. You trudge through the snow toward the tree line, boots crunching. Trees look plentiful from afar, but the moment you get close, you notice how young many of them are: thin trunks, spindly branches. The mature ones have long been claimed. And here's a mainstream fact. By the High Middle Ages, Europe's population had exploded, farmland expanded, and communities had cut so many trees for building, heating, and ploughing that entire regions were running dangerously low. And the forests that did remain? Yeah, about those. A man steps out from behind a tree, holding a staff. Not a peasant, not a traveller, a forester, one of the Lord's officials. His job is to monitor who takes what, and more importantly, who has the right to take anything at all. He looks at you with the kind of expression someone uses when they're deciding whether you're up to no good. You raise your hands in a very "I swear I'm innocent but also extremely cold" gesture. You're not here to chop down anything, but you can practically feel the tension in the air. You remember what people used to whisper. Cutting the Lord's timber, without permission, could earn you fines so steep they crushed your entire family. Or worse, public punishments meant to discourage everyone else. A quirky historical tidbit: in some places, people could legally gather only fallen branches, and even then only under the supervision of forest officials. You imagine applying for a permit just to pick up a stick. Medieval bureaucracy. Thrilling, glamorous, deeply chill. The forester narrows his eyes. He's just waiting for you to slip a hatchet out of your belt. But instead, you only shift your weight, crunching snow beneath your boots, and turn toward a half-cleared patch beyond the trees. He relaxes. Barely. You walk on. Snow clings to your eyelashes as you approach a clearing, where stumps dot the landscape like missing teeth. Here's where the story deepens. Peasants didn't avoid firewood because they didn't want to burn it. They avoided it because it became something you had to ration like money. Think about it. If your family, we had only a few logs for the entire winter, would you dare burn them all at once? You'd save them for the coldest nights, the sickest children, the times when the wind crept under the door like a thief with a grudge. Historians still argue whether medieval lords restricted wood out of genuine environmental concern or simple economic control, because forests meant income, building material, hunting space, and status. Most likely it was both, wrapped in a tight little bundle labelled "Don't touch," or else. You stamp your feet to keep feeling in your toes. The air tastes sharp, metallic. Somewhere far off, an axe strikes wood. A deep, distant thump. Someone is chopping, legally or not. A risky act tonight. As you walk, you notice piles of brush and twigs left behind by forest workers. These aren't firewood in the romantic sense. They're messy, uneven bits of branches that don't burn clean or long. But for peasants, gold. You crouch and pick up a few. They crumble, slightly in your hand, brittle from cold. You stuff them into your bundle like a thief. Except this is one of the few things the forester doesn't care about. Brushwood gathering was often allowed because it didn't threaten valuable timber. Still, nothing here is simple. Even collecting brush became a timed event. Villagers might be summoned on specific days to take what they needed, all supervised, all recorded. You glance again at the distant house you left behind. Suddenly, it makes sense why that woman was burning peat instead of logs. Logs weren't just scarce, they were locked behind a wall of rules. You start to walk back toward the village. Snowflakes melt on your lips, tasting like cold iron. A shiver crawls up your spine, the kind that feels like it's tapping on your bones. You stop at a fence where branches have been woven tightly to block wind. You brush frost off the top rail, and your hand comes away numb. A light joke bubbles up in your brain, something along the lines of, "Congratulations, your hand is now a medieval popsicle." But your voice fogs the air instead. You pass a group of villagers, dragging bundles of sticks too small to even call kindling. They nod at you, eyes squinting against the cold. One laughs bitterly and says, "Good wood is for the rich." You can't help but smile back with a sympathy that needs no translation. The more you walk, the clearer the pattern becomes. Firewood became a symbol of privilege, something that separated those who shivered from those who didn't. Some households had enough to burn regularly. Others rationed their stacks like a dragon guarding treasure. By the time you reach the edge of the village again, your fingers are tingling. You push your hands into your cloak and feel nothing. They're that cold. And then, as if on cue, the wind slams into you again. A gust that makes you feel like a stack of laundry someone forgot to pin down. You look toward the little cottage where you started. A thin column of smoke rises lazily from the chimney. Not strong, not lavish, not wasteful. Just enough to keep someone alive. And tonight, you finally understand the truth. Medieval peasants didn't burn firewood because they couldn't. Not because they wouldn't. Because in their world, a log wasn't fuel, it was wealth. And warmth was something you earned. You leave the edge of the forest behind and follow a narrow, snow-packed path that winds toward the marshlands east of the village. It feels counterintuitive. Why would anyone willingly walk toward a bog in winter? That's like voluntarily stepping into nature's cold, wet handshake. But peasants did exactly that. Because tonight, you're about to meet one of the strangest and most important fuels of the medieval world. Peat. The smell hits first, not awful, just earthy. Like wet soil and old leaves that never quite finished whatever decomposition journey they started. The ground beneath your boots changes from crisp snow to a softer, spongier layer. With every step, the earth seems to sigh, as if complaining about being touched during its months-long nap. In the distance, you see them. Dark, rectangular stacks, arranged in neat, surprisingly organized rows. They look like little fortresses, built entirely out of brownies. Great. Now you're craving medieval dessert. Which, by the way, is just bread with sadness on top. As you get closer, you notice villagers wrapped in layers of wool, and wrapped again in layers of "we're desperate," examining these blocks with pride. These are peat bricks, carved from the bog during warmer months, dried under the sun, and now worth more than half the sticks you saw people gathering near the forest. A mainstream historical fact slips in. In many regions, especially in Ireland, Scotland, England, the Netherlands, and Scandinavia, peat was the backbone of winter fuel supplies. It burned slowly, produced long-lasting heat, and didn't cost anything, besides sweat and the occasional sinking ankle. You crouch beside a stack, touch one of the bricks, and feel its surprising weight dense and slightly crumbly. A villager smiles at your curiosity and hands you a fresh one. "Found this one half buried," he says. "Good piece. Burns slow. You smell your hands afterward. Congratulations, you now smell like swamp memories and carbonized moss." He leads you to the marsh edge, where the outline of last summer's peat cuts still linger long. Straight trenches carved by peasants wielding tools shaped like cross between shovels and giant pastry cutters. You imagine cutting someone's birthday cake with one of those. Very festive, very alarming. The villager dips his tool into the frozen surface, miming the motion. He explains how peat was sliced into thick slabs, stacked to drain, then left to dry for weeks until the water content dropped low enough to burn. Historians still argue whether peat cutting was an environmentally sustainable practice or a slow-motion ecological problem, because peatlands regenerate painfully slowly. But peasants didn't have environmental think pieces in their timelines. They had winter, and winter demanded fuel. You watch as the villager tosses a brick onto his sled. It lands with a thud that sounds almost comforting, reliable. Peat doesn't crackle like wood. It doesn't leap into flame. It smoulders, quietly, like someone warming their hands by brooding over old messages. You follow him to a small cottage nearby. The door creaks open, and instantly the air inside wraps around you like a tired blanket. A low, steady heat radiates from the hearth, where peat bricks glow a deep orange. Not bright, not showy, but persistent. The room smells like warm earth, a little smoky, a little boggy, the kind of scent that would confuse modern scented candle enthusiasts who insist on buying $48 jars labeled Cedar Moonlight or Cozy Birch Whisper. If you bottled this medieval peat scent, you'd need to call it damp determination. You sit beside the fire, watching how the bricks collapse inward, almost melting. The glow shifts from orange to reddish purple, a mesmerizing slow burn dance. And because humor keeps you alive, your brain whispers, this must be what lava would look like if it had social anxiety. A child places a tiny iron pot on the hearth to warm milk. The fire responds with a faint hiss, barely acknowledging the pot's existence. Peat doesn't rush. It barely cares. It burns on its own schedule. You run your fingers through your cloak, noticing how the warmth from these bricks sinks into fabric gradually, not sharply. It's gentle, consistent, dependable, the kind of heat you could fall asleep to. A quirky tidbit the villager shares with you before stepping outside. Peat smokes less when it's good. If it smokes a lot, it's too wet. He chuckles. But sometimes you burn it anyway. Wet or dry, heat is heat. You glance at the modest stack beside the hearth. 10 bricks, maybe 12. Enough for a day or two, if used carefully. Not enough for comfort, but enough for survival. And every brick represents a summer of sweating in the marsh, slicing, hauling, stacking, drying, praying for sun, and hoping rats didn't get to the pile. You look at the hearth again. This flame isn't glamorous. It isn't romantic. But it is life. As you rise to leave, you brush peat dust off your gloves, tiny black crumbs that will probably stay there forever. Because that's what peat does. It lingers, in the air, on your clothes, in history. Back outside, the cold is merciless again, but you now understand why peasants ventured into muddy bogs and came home smelling like nature's compost bin. Peat burned long, burned steady, and most importantly, it burned when wood didn't. You leave the peat stacks behind, brushing the last stubborn flecks of bog dust from your cloak as you trudge back toward the village. The air feels colder now, sharper, almost offended that you briefly enjoyed actual warmth. Your breath streams through the dark like little ghosts fleeing your mouth, and the snow underfoot squeaks in that very specific, it's way too cold for humans to be outside right now way. But there's another smell on the wind now. A dry, dusty, unmistakably barnyardish smell. You wrinkle your nose. You don't need a medieval textbook to identify it. Your brain already knows. Yes, dung. The fuel nobody wants to talk about, but everybody used. You follow the scent toward a wide, low shed at the far end of the village. By the time you reach it, there's no denying it, you've arrived at the winter fuel source that quite literally kept medieval peasants alive when firewood was rarer than a snowman with health insurance. Your boots crunch into the mixture of frost and old straw. A woman steps out of the shed, carrying a large wicker basket full of dark, rounded patties. She's smiling not because the smell is lovely. It is not. But because this basket is worth more in January than gold-plated firewood. She sees your confused expression and chuckles. Don't look so horrified, she says. It burns clean mostly. You step closer, trying not to breathe too deeply. She hands you one of the dried dung cakes. It's surprisingly light, almost like holding a very disgruntled cookie. You tap it gently and hear a hollow sound. It's dry, completely dry, and that's the key. A mainstream historical fact pops into your head. Throughout medieval Europe, Central Asia, the Middle East, North Africa, and every region short on wood, dried dung was a primary household fuel. Cows, Horses, goats, even camels, whatever left droppings peasants found a use for. You hold the dung cake awkwardly between two fingers, like it's some kind of radioactive tortilla. The woman laughs harder this time. "Don't worry," she says. "This one's months old. No smell left in it. Fresh ones, well, that's another story." You follow her into the shed. Inside, the walls are stacked with rows of drying dung cakes arranged like shelves of extremely unfortunate chocolates. Straw is mixed into many of them, an old trick that helps bind the patties and makes them dry faster. A quirky tidbit. In some regions, families shape dung into artistic sunbursts, squares, flowers, even spirals. Peasant Pinterest before Pinterest existed. You kneel beside one of the stacks, touching a cake with your gloved fingertips. It's firm, dry, and surprisingly clean feeling. And because your humor is a coping mechanism, your brain whispers, "Congrats, you're petting poop. This is your life now." The woman gestures for you to follow her to her cottage. You step inside, and instantly, the air is warmer, far warmer than you expect for a home without firewood. The hearth glows, not with bright logs or shining coals, but with a deep, steady burn of dung cakes, stacked carefully like bricks in a firebox. You sit near the hearth, watching how they burn. Unlike wood, they don't flare. Unlike peat, they don't collapse quickly. They glow from the inside, radiating an even, persistent warmth that makes the whole room feel gently heated, like a radiator that's never in a hurry. The smell? Honestly, it's not awful. More earthy than anything. A faint hint of the barn, maybe, but nothing like the dramatic horror your modern brain expected. Historians still argue whether dung fires were more environmentally sustainable than logging or peat harvesting. Some point out that burning dung meant removing valuable fertilizer from fields. Others say that livestock produced so much manure that families could spare plenty. The debate continues, which is a very scholarly way of saying, we don't totally know, but everyone has strong opinions. You warm your hands over the hearth. The glow feels different from wood, softer, steadier, as though the fire is humming to itself instead of roaring. The woman sits on a low stool and begins shaping fresh patties. She scoops the manure with a wooden ladle, mixes it with straw, presses it into discs, and sets them on a board. You watch each motion. She's done this thousands of times. Her hands are confident, efficient, unfazed. She sees your expression and shrugs. In winter, everything is fuel if it burns. Pride doesn't keep you warm. Fair point. She tosses another dung cake onto the fire. It falls apart slightly, then settles into a glowing ember. You imagine how many of these her family will burn this week alone. Dozens? Hundreds? And suddenly you understand. This wasn't just a quirky last resort option. This was a system, a whole survival strategy built around collecting, drying, storing, and burning an endless supply of manure. You stand, brushing, crumbs from your cloak. Dung crumbs. You don't want to think about it. The fire's warmth follows you out the door, sticking to your clothes like a farewell kiss. Outside again, your cheeks sting from the cold. You look back at her humble home, feeling an unexpected sense of respect, maybe even awe. Because this fuel, this simple, clever, unglamorous fuel kept entire regions alive. You walk on, noticing other cottages with the same faint, earthy smoke drifting from chimneys. Dung fires everywhere, fighting the winter in slow, steady defiance. Another villager passes with a basket on his back. More dung, frozen solid. He waves at you. "Good burning today," he calls. "It's dry as old bones." You wave back, smiling because here in the medieval deep freeze, dry as old bones is practically a compliment. Snow drifts down around you. Your boots crunch. Your breath fogs. And now you know. When medieval winters turned brutal, peasants didn't rely on the forests. They relied on the fields, and the animals, and the one fuel you never expected to admire. Dung wasn't a joke. It was survival pressed, shaped, dried, stacked, burned, and honored as the quiet fire that saved lives. You keep walking through the village, your cloak tugged sideways by the wind like it's trying to stage a dramatic exit. But you're not heading for another cottage this time. No. Your attention drifts toward the wide, pale fields stretching beyond the fences, fields that look dead in winter, but are actually hiding a secret weapon. At first glance, they seem empty, just acres of flat white stretching lazily into the horizon. But as you step closer, you notice something poking through the snow. Little bristly stalks, dry and golden, sticking out like nature's forgotten toothbrushes. Stubble, straw, chaff. This is where the next chapter of fuel begins. You climb over a low fence, boots sinking ankle deep into powder, and follow a set of narrow footprints winding across the field. Before long, you spot them. A small group of villagers crouched near a heap of dried stalks, bundled into rough sheaves. They're gathering every useful scrap left behind from the last harvest: bits of straw, chaff from the threshing floor, twiggy brush pulled from the hedgerows. The stuff you usually think of as farm trash. But tonight, it's fuel. One of the men waves you over. If it crackles, he says, lifting a bundle of straw like he's presenting treasure, it burns. The bundle looks laughably light, as though a strong sigh could send it flying. But these people aren't laughing. This flimsy stack might keep their stew bubbling, their hands warm, or their candles lit long enough to do night chores. It won't burn long, and it won't burn hot, but it will burn sometimes. That's all winter demands. A mainstream fact surfaces in your mind. Harvest leftovers, straw, stubble, and chaff were among the most commonly burned materials by lower-income households across medieval Europe. Wood was expensive, peat wasn't everywhere, and dung needed livestock. Straw, however? Every farm had some. You crouch beside the pile, brushing your gloved fingers through the straw. It rustles with that soft, papery whisper that somehow sounds warm despite being icy cold. Each strand is brittle, snapping easily. You imagine tossing a handful into a hearth. It would flare brightly for a few seconds, maybe long enough to get a peat brick going, heat water, or toast a piece of blackened bread. A young girl kneels beside you. She grabs a small basket and starts sorting the straw, dividing the longest, cleanest pieces from the shorter ones, mixed with grit. You raise an eyebrow. She grins. The long bits make heat. The short bits make smoke. Ah, good to know. She sets aside a bundle of especially dry stalks and hands one to you like it's a prize. This one, she says proudly, burns like it wants to show off. You twirl it between your fingers. It's nothing, almost weightless, but in a world where warmth is rationed like luxury perfume, even this is valuable. The villagers begin tying the bundles tightly with thin lengths of twine. As they work, you notice a few darker stalks, mixed in thorny, twig-like pieces pulled from hedges. One woman snaps one in half, and it makes a loud crack. An excellent sound. That's blackthorn, she explains. Prickly to gather, wonderful to burn. If the hedge doesn't stab you, you didn't do it right. A light joke slips out before you can stop yourself. Good to know medieval survival requires both bravery and band-aids. She snorts. Band-aids would be nice. As you watch them gather, tie, and stack the bundles, another quirky tidbit pops up. In some medieval manuscripts, straw fuel fires were considered perfect for baking small flatbreads because they burned fast and hot, giving just enough heat to crisp dough without wasting precious logs. So, peasants weren't just surviving, they were optimizing. Centuries before anyone invented the word, you help load a few bundles into a wooden sled. It creaks under the weight, not because the bundles are heavy, but because the sled is old enough to remember at least 3 crusades. A boy pulls the sled toward the village, and you follow behind as the wind tosses bits of straw into the air like confetti at the world's saddest festival. Back inside his cottage, the family begins using the straw immediately. A pot sits over a small ember bed, barely warm. The boy tosses a handful of straw onto it, and instantly the hearth flares up, bathing the room in a burst of golden light. For a moment, the cold outside feels far away. You watch the flame rise high, burn fiercely, then settle into a gentle glow, its dramatic peak lasting maybe 10 seconds. But those 10 seconds? Enough to reheat dinner, warm fingers, restart a dying ember, or give a freezing child a moment of comfort. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants preferred straw fires out of necessity or habit. Some say it was simply what they had. Others argue that people valued the quick heat and easy ignition. The debate continues in a way that feels almost poetic. humans trying to interpret the meaning of burning leftovers. You sit by the hearth, hands stretched toward the faint warmth. The smell is pleasant enough, light, vegetal, slightly sweet, like toasted hay. It reminds you of summer for a moment, which feels impossibly far away now. The family works around you. The father arranges more straw bundles near the hearth, keeping them away from stray sparks. The mother plucks twigs from her pocket, blackthorn again, and tosses them into a clay jar. The children shake the last bits of chaff from their mittens, laughing when some of it gets stuck in your hair. "You're one of us now," one says. "Field Firehead." You brush off your cloak, smiling. Your new medieval nickname. Unlocked. Outside again, you watch sparks dance out of the chimney and rise into the dark, caught by the wind and carried who knows where. You pull your cloak tight. You breathe into your hands. The night is long and frozen and unforgiving. But now you know the truth. Medieval peasants burned anything that crackled, flashed, or smouldered even for mere seconds. Straw, stubble, chaff, brush, thorny twigs with an attitude. These weren't scraps. They were lifelines. Winter currency. The thin border between surviving and freezing. You take one last look at the field, its pale surface hiding millions of tiny flames waiting to be found. You head north of the village now, following a ragged, winding path that disappears and reappears under drifts of snow. The fields fade behind you, and the land grows rougher, rockier, bumpier, shaped by centuries of stubborn plants clinging to thin, medieval soil. It feels like you're walking through a forgotten corner of the world, the kind of place where only the toughest, prickliest things survive. Perfect. Because tonight, your next lesson in medieval winter survival is all about the thorny cousins of firewood, heather, gorse, and scrub brush, the underdog plants that peasants chopped, gathered, and burned when the forest said, "No more." The wind sweeps across the heath, fluttering your cloak and throwing needles of ice into your face. You squint and look out over the landscape. What you first took for lumpy snowbanks slowly resolves into masses of low, dense shrubs, tangled branches, studded with tiny, stubborn leaves. These plants look like they woke up angry. As you step closer, the wind shifts, carrying the faint scent of resin, sharp and clean. A promising sign. Plants rich in resin burn hot, fast, and bright. And when you're facing 30 degrees Fahrenheit nights, hot, fast, and bright is basically a love language. A figure emerges from behind a gorse thicket, bundled in layers of wool with a hood pulled low. She's dragging a bundle of brush tied with rope, the whole thing wider than she is. She spots you and nods with the resigned expression of someone who's been stabbed by thorns all afternoon. "You're late," she mutters, handing you a pair of heavy mittens reinforced with rough leather. Gorse doesn't gather itself. You slip them on. The mittens are thick, warm, and most importantly thorn-proof. The woman gestures toward a clump of gorse, which looks entirely unapproachable. Bright yellow blossoms peek out from the branches, a surprisingly cheerful detail in this frozen landscape. You reach toward it, hesitating. A thorn catches your mitten instantly, snagging it like a tiny, hostile handshake. She laughs. That's how you know it burns well. The angrier the plant, the hotter the fire. You help her cut branches with a small billhook. The brush snaps with satisfying resin-rich cracks. As you work, snow dusts your cloak and collects in your hood like nature's confetti. Gorse pokes through your mittens anyway, because nature has decided you haven't suffered enough yet. One branch snaps free and smacks your cloak hard enough to make you grunt. Congratulations, you've been shoulder-checked by a plant. A mainstream fact filters in as you rub your shoulder. Gorse and heather were among the primary fuels in many northern and highland regions, especially where trees struggled to grow. In places like Scotland, Ireland, Wales, and northern England, entire communities relied on these shrubs for daily cooking, heating, and even drying wet clothes. You haul the bundles back to the woman's cottage, fingers numb despite the mittens, and follow her inside. The door slams shut behind you, and immediately the air feels warmer, not because the room is well heated, but because it's not the outdoors actively trying to assassinate you. The hearth is small, surrounded by stones darkened with resin burns. Inside, a tangle of gorse branches crackles fiercely, sending up a shower of sparks that dance like tiny fire sprites. The flames are bright, shockingly bright, and they smell faintly sweet and herbal, like someone tried to roast pine needles on purpose. The woman tosses a handful of heather on top. The fire responds instantly, flaring, singing, sizzling. You're pretty sure this is the medieval equivalent of hitting the turbo button. A child pipes up from the corner. Don't throw too much. Last time it burned the bread. The woman waves him off. Then you shouldn't have put it so close. She looks at you. Gorse cooks fast. You must keep watch. Blink, and your stew's ashes. A quirky tidbit whispers into memory. Heather and gorse fires were perfect for quick tasks: heating irons, boiling water, firing clay beads, warming washing stones because they burned hotter than straw but cooler than hardwood logs. A kind of middle zone between real firewood and the field scraps you saw earlier. You sit by the hearth, letting the heat wash over your hands. This warmth is different, sharper, more intense, almost spicy. Gorse fires don't smolder politely like peat, or glow steadily like dung. They burn like they have something to prove. Historians still argue whether peasants cultivated gorse on purpose to use as fuel, or simply used whichever shrubs naturally grew around them. Some evidence suggests deliberate planting along hedgerows. Other scholars insist gorse was too wild, too chaotic to manage. The debate continues, pricking academic pride like a thorny branch. The woman stirs a pot hanging over the flames. The fire flares up again, licking the iron as if trying to taste dinner before anyone else. Careful, she says. Gorse likes excitement. You laugh. I've noticed. You watch the flames twist, dance, and send sparks darting into the chimney. This fuel doesn't last long, but while it burns like it wants the whole world to know. The woman sets aside another bundle. For tomorrow's tasks: drying laundry, warming water for washing, heating irons for mending clothes. These shrubs, prickly and unassuming, are the multitaskers of medieval fuel. When you step outside again, the wind cuts through you, but the warmth lingers in your cloak, clinging like a fading memory. Behind you, a trail of sparks escapes the chimney and flies into the night, scattered like golden stars across the dark sky. You tug your hood tighter and walk on, realizing something important. Medieval peasants didn't just burn wood substitutes. They burned everything the land offered: peat from the bogs, dung from the barns, straw from the fields, and now, heather and gorse from the wild places. Fuel wasn't a commodity. It was a map one that showed exactly how far a family was willing to walk, climb, cut, or carry just to stay alive. You leave the thorny hedges behind, rubbing your arms where the gorse got in a few final cheap shots, and start heading west toward the faint smell of salt on the air. The landscape changes as you walk. The snow thins slightly, wind grows sharper, and the horizon stretches open like a pale, icy sheet. Somewhere out there lies the coast, and with it, one of the strangest, heaviest, dirtiest fuels medieval peasants ever burned. Sea coal. Not wood, not peat, not dung. Actual chunks of black rock. At first, the idea seems absurd. How does a rock burn? But here in these harsh winter lands, especially along the northeastern coasts of England and Scotland, people didn't ask questions. They picked it up, set it on fire, and thanked whatever saint handled miraculous combustibility. The wind stiffens as you step onto the ridge, overlooking a wide, frozen grey shoreline. Waves crash against rock, sending up plumes of white spray that freeze midair in tiny crystals. And scattered along, the tide line, half buried in sand and icy foam, lie dark, lumpy shapes, almost like sea-soaked treasure chests, cracked open by storms. You walk toward them, your boots sinking into the wet sand with unpleasant, squelchy determination. When you reach one of the black lumps, you crouch and brush snow from its surface. Your gloves come away smudged with soot. Sea coal. A mainstream historical fact hits you. Before deep mining became common, medieval communities along certain coastlines collected coal that naturally washed ashore from exposed seams eroded by waves. Peasants didn't discover coal. They literally found it lying on the beach, like weird, heavy seashells. You pick up a piece. It's unexpectedly heavy, cold as iron, and leaves streaks of black dust across your palms. You feel like you've just committed a minor crime against laundry. A man approaches from further down the beach, pulling a sled loaded with more of these lumps. He grunts. Hello, then squints at your sooty hands with the sympathetic look only a fellow coal-fingered sufferer can offer. Tide brought a good haul today, he says. Storm last night loosened more from the cliffs. He leans on his sled. Burns hot, burns long, smokes like the devil. You nod. Your nose wrinkles. Even outdoors, the coal smells metallic, almost oily. He laughs, reading your expression easily. Oh, you'll smell it more soon enough. Come on. You follow him inland to a small stone cottage. Even before you reach the door, you see the evidence. The walls above the chimney are streaked black. The snow near the eaves is smudged grey. Even the air around the house feels different, thicker, heavier, scented with a sharp, mineral tang. Inside, the cottage is warm, shockingly warm. But the air hits you like a smoky slap. Coal smoke. Heavy, pungent, unmistakable. You cough instinctively. The man waves a hand as if to say, "Get used to it or freeze." He tosses a chunk into the hearth, where a few glowing embers lie waiting. The coal hisses, cracks, then blooms into flame-rich blue and orange, hotter than any peat or gorse you've seen. The warmth blooms outward in a wave that makes your cheeks tingle. A child rushes over to a pot suspended above the fire and stirs its contents eagerly. The coal fire keeps the pot at a steady boil, without constant tending, something straw, dung, and gorse could never do. A quirky tidbit pops into mind. Early medieval towns hated coal smoke, complaining it stank, blackened walls, and irritated throats. In the 1300s, London even attempted early air quality laws, banning coal burning during parliamentary sessions. Nice try, London. People still froze. Historians still argue whether medieval people understood coal's long-term health effects. Some say they noticed chronic coughs and smoky rafters. Others suggest people just shrugged and said, "Warm is warm," because survival trumped everything. You sit near the hearth, eyes watering from the smoke. The coal pops loudly, sending tiny sparks snapping against the stones. The heat it produces is undeniable, deep, strong, penetrating. You can see why coastal families prized it so highly. One lump burns for hours, doing the work of half a day's worth of dung cakes. The man pokes the fire with a metal rod. "Good coal today," he says. "Not the crumbly kind. This burns clean." You raise an eyebrow. "Clean?" You're fairly certain the soot currently tattooing your lungs would disagree. He grins anyway. "Cleaner than some," he clarifies. "You'll see the bad stuff later. Smokes till you can't find your own feet." Lovely. You watch the flames curl around the coal. It glows a deep, sinister red, like the beating heart of the hearth. There's something mesmerizing about it, even as it tries to redecorate the inside of your nose. When you finally step outside, the cold feels brutal again, but your clothes radiate stored heat. You notice streaks of soot on your cloak, your gloves, your face. A smear across your cheek makes you look like a medieval chimney sweep who lost a fight with the fireplace. The man waves from the doorway. "Storm coming tonight. Sea coal might wash up again. If you need warmth, check the tide." You wave back, coughing into your sleeve as a puff of coal smoke escapes the chimney like a final farewell hug. Walking up the hill, you glance over your shoulder and see the blackened plume rising into the pale sky. A thin, dirty thread connecting the earth to the heavens. Not beautiful, not clean, not pleasant, but powerful, reliable, life-saving. Coal wasn't just fuel. For coastal peasants, it was a miracle delivered on the tide, heavy, dirty, smoky, and absolutely essential. In a winter this cold, you burn whatever burns. And tonight, the sea has given fire. You leave the coal-darkened cottage behind, coughing softly into your sleeve as the last bit of soot clings to your lungs like it has paid rent. The cold outside feels sharper now, cleaner, almost medicinal after that heavy coal atmosphere. Your clothes still radiate leftover heat, but it leaks quickly into the icy air. You pull your cloak tighter and head toward the village center, where the houses bunch closely together like a group of people huddling for warmth, which, honestly, they sort of are. Because tonight you're about to step into one of the most overlooked pieces of medieval winter survival. Tiny houses built like thermal traps. You approach a row of cottages crouched low under the snow, their roofs heavy with frost, and their doors small enough that you have to duck. One woman is outside beating a rug. Well, rug is generous. It's more like a large rectangle of woven plant fibers hoping to retire soon. Each strike sends out a miserable cloud of dust, straw bits, and the ghost of ancient potato crumbs. She calls out, "Don't mind the size. Small rooms stay warm. Big rooms stay dead." Good to know. You step inside the nearest cottage and immediately feel the difference. Warmth. Not a lot, not luxury warm, but captured warmth. It hits you like stepping into a medieval version of a blanket fort. The ceiling hangs low enough to brush your fingertips. The walls seem to lean inward, like they're hugging the room's heat and whispering, "Mine." Every surface, walls, rafters, shelves, is dark, soot-stained, and rough. It feels like you're standing inside the ribcage of a slumbering beast, trying to keep its last scraps of heat alive. A mainstream historical fact flickers through your memory. Medieval peasant homes were intentionally small, with low ceilings and minimal open space, because every cubic foot of air required fuel to heat. A bigger room meant more cold, more airflow, more misery. So they kept their interiors compact, closed, and well insulated with wattle, daub, and layers of plastered clay mixed with straw. A short, sturdy man tends a very small fire in the hearth, not a crackling blaze, more like a glowing smolder working overtime. He motions you closer. Sit. Door lets in cold every time it opens. Heat runs away. You sit on a wooden bench, its surface smooth from centuries of people sitting exactly where you are. The warmth in here is modest but persistent, and you begin to notice details. The doorway is tiny, forcing you to crouch every time you lower your body. Heat doesn't escape. The windows are the size of postcards, covered with horn or oiled cloth instead of glass. The floor is packed earth, sometimes layered with straw for insulation and sound. The ceiling is low, trapping warmth where people actually live. The man pokes the fire again, and a faint orange glow spreads across the hearth. You notice that the chimneys here don't draw well, and that's on purpose. A well-drawing chimney pulls smoke out quickly, but it also pulls heat out. Many cottages were designed to be smoky, because smoke itself helped preserve wood beams and repel insects. A quirky tidbit comes to mind. In some households, smoke was considered so valuable for preserving roof timbers that people intentionally kept fires smoky to feed the rafters. Yep, smoke-fed wood. Medieval logic. Confusing, but surprisingly effective. You glance upward, noticing how the rafters are covered in a thick, shiny coat of soot. They look like they've been dipped in ink. The man notices your gaze and smirks. "Good smoke here," he says proudly, like someone boasting about their tomato harvest. Historians still argue whether medieval homes were intentionally smoky because of roof preservation, heat retention, or simply terrible ventilation. Most likely, a chaotic mix of all three. But standing here with your eyes watering slightly, all you know is that this room is warm, and that's what counted. A woman sets a wooden bowl of water near the hearth. Within minutes, the surface begins to thaw, not boil, not steam, just thaw. And in winter, that alone feels like sorcery. She pats the wall affectionately. "Holds heat well," she says. "This house has thick bones." You run your hand over the daub. It's cool to the touch, but not icy. The mixture of clay, straw, and dung makes a surprisingly effective insulator. Modern people spend thousands on thermal windows. Medieval peasants, they slapped mud on their walls and called it a day. The man lifts a small, flat stone from near the hearth. It radiates soft warmth. "Bedstones," he explains. "Heat them by the fire, wrap in cloth, warm your feet." You imagine sliding into bed with one of those blessed little rocks. You silently swear fealty to any object that warm in this cold. A child scampers past you, his cheeks pink from proximity to the hearth. He crawls through a small interior doorway into a second tiny room, a sleeping space, barely big enough for a straw-stuffed mattress and a pile of blankets. Every inch is compact, every corner designed for warmth. Every decision rooted in necessity. And yet there's a certain charm in this efficiency. A humble brilliance, born from thousands of winters, where people learned exactly how to trap every last degree of heat. The man gestures around him. "Big houses belong to lords. Big fires, too. We keep to our size. Small keeps you alive." You nod, finally appreciating how much engineering is packed into these soot-stained walls. No wasted space. No drafty hallways. No vaulted ceilings. Just warmth held tight like a secret. When you step outside again, the cold slaps you in the face immediately, reminding you how fragile warmth is out here. You pull your cloak tight, already missing the cramped embrace of the cottage. In a world where firewood is rare and winter doesn't negotiate, peasants didn't rely on fuel alone. They engineered survival one tiny house at a time. You walk away from the tiny, soot-dark cottage, and the cold pounces on you immediately as if it had been hiding behind the door, waiting to ambush you the moment you stepped outside. The warmth you'd absorbed inside evaporates within seconds. Your breath crystallizes, your lashes prickle with frost, and your fingertips turn stiff even inside your gloves. This is the kind of cold that doesn't just feel unpleasant, it feels personal, like it wants to negotiate your survival directly. And now, you're about to learn the next truth of medieval winter life. People didn't rely only on fire for warmth, because fire wasn't reliable. They relied on each other, and on layers of clothing so thick you'd swear gravity got heavier. You spot a family walking toward a nearby stable. All of them, children, parents, grandparents, are bundled in so many layers of wool they look like soft, irritated onions. You follow them inside, and instantly the air feels a few degrees warmer, thanks to the animal's breath and body heat. A little boy laughs when he sees you shivering. "Too cold for your thin cloak," he says. You resist the urge to explain that you come from a future where jackets have names like Extreme Arctic Hyperthermo Max Pro. Here, wool is the only technology that matters, and it's good at its job. A mainstream historical fact drifts into your mind. In winter, medieval peasants often slept in their clothes, sometimes wearing 2 or 3 tunics, cloaks, and even outer coats to bed. Fabrics weren't washed often, partly because water froze, but wool stayed warm even when damp, and linen underlayers wicked sweat surprisingly well. The grandmother in the group pats your shoulder. "You're cold because you're dressed for summer," she says sternly. "You're currently wearing more layers than a medieval wedding cake, but sure, point taken." She shows you her nighttime outfit piece by piece. A linen shift, a thick wool tunic, another tunic over that, a felted wool outer coat, a cloak lined with rabbit fur, and socks so long they've basically declared themselves trousers. "Don't take any of it off at night," she advises. "That's how you lose the heat you spent all day earning." You watch as the family prepares their sleeping area, a heap of straw topped with blankets, cloaks, and 2 low-wool mattresses that look more like flattened sheep. But the real secret isn't the bedding, it's the people. The children climb into one bed together, piling themselves like puppies. The adults do the same. Even the grandparents tuck in close. Privacy is a luxury for summer. In winter, warmth wins every argument. A quirky historical tidbit flickers up. Many medieval families practiced bundling, where they slept in pairs or groups for warmth, even unmarried adults, travelers, or neighbors on harsh nights. It wasn't romantic or scandalous. It was thermodynamics with manners. You're invited to sit near the bed while they finish arranging blankets. The grandmother hands you a thick bundle of cloth. "Wool hood," she says. "Wear it to sleep. Keeps your ears." You slip it over your head. It's scratchy, itchy, and smells vaguely of sheep, but it's warm enough that your ears begin to thaw, which feels like a miracle. Another boy climbs onto the sleeping pile holding a small dog with an expression suggesting the dog did not consent. "Our foot warmer," he declares proudly. Historians still argue whether families kept dogs indoors primarily for security, companionship, or heat sharing. Why choose? This dog is currently performing all 3 jobs, while looking like he'd prefer early retirement. You notice something else. The cottage is tiny. The sleeping area takes up nearly half the home. The ceiling slopes low enough that you could touch it lying down. This isn't cramped by accident, it's a survival design. Less air to warm, less body heat to lose. The family starts to settle in, crawling under blankets, tucking wool around their shoulders, arranging bodies, in a gentle tangle that somehow makes perfect sense. You sit nearby, feeling the room gradually fill with warmth, not from fire, but from people. When the father blows out the candle, the darkness wraps around all of you like another blanket. The only sounds are breathing, shifting cloth, and the occasional offended grunt from the dog. You lie there on a spare cloak, listening. It's peaceful. It's intimate. It's honest. No one is pretending to be heroic. No one is trying to fight the cold alone. In a world without central heating, shared heat isn't a phrase, it's a lifestyle. You stretch your legs, feeling the heat radiating from every direction. Your back is warmer than it has been in hours. Your feet stop aching. Your breath no longer turns to frost instantly. For the first time tonight, you feel comfortable. Not because the fire is strong, not because the house is insulated, but because this is how medieval peasants truly survived winter. Layers, furs, cloaks, dogs, straw beds, shared blankets, shared heat, warmth created by community, warmth maintained by closeness, warmth earned by living together through the cold. When you finally rise and step outside again, the air feels like a slap of iron. But the memory of that sleeping pile stays wrapped around you like an invisible cloak, and you realize something quiet and profound. Fire kept peasants alive, but each other kept them warm. You leave the stable and that warm pile of humans, dogs, and wool behind, stepping once again into the kind of cold that feels like it has a personal vendetta against your fingertips. The night has deepened. The wind whistles through the village lanes, rattling doors and sneaking under cloaks with the enthusiasm of a tax collector. Your breath comes out in long, foggy ribbons. Your stomach rumbles loudly, because medieval winter has a way of reminding you that warmth isn't just about fire or blankets. It's also about food. And tonight, you're about to discover the winter kitchen tricks that stretched every ember and every calorie until spring dared show its face again. A thin glow spills from one cottage window, so you push the door open gently. Inside, a woman stands over a squat iron pot, suspended above a very modest fire. Not a blazing hearth, just a small cluster of embers glowing like tired fireflies. But somehow, the room smells incredible. Roasted grains, onions, herbs. Something simmering slowly and stubbornly. She looks up at you with a smile. Close the door, love. I don't need the cold helping itself. You obey, and the warmth, such as it is, settles around you. A mainstream historical fact clicks instantly into place. Medieval families organized their cooking around slow, fuel-efficient meals, stews, porridges, pottages because they warmed the house and filled the stomach without demanding strong fires. In winter, simmering was practically a religion. She stirs the pot with a long-handled spoon. Needs another hour, she says, peering in. You glance at the fire skeptically. Will it stay warm that long? She chuckles. Oh, it'll manage. It doesn't need to boil only warm. Warm keeps the belly alive. You sit beside her and watch as she uses one of the oldest medieval kitchen hacks, the stone trick. Beside the hearth lies a pile of smooth, river-rounded stones, each one fist-sized and dark with soot. The woman picks one up using iron tongs, sets it into the embers until it glows faintly, then drops it carefully into the pot. Instantly, the liquid inside hisses around the stone's surface, releasing a burst of steam that warms your face. Stone warming, low fuel, high heat retention, perfect thermal cheat. A quirky tidbit comes to mind. Long before crock-pots or heat diffusers, medieval cooks used stones to keep stews warm long into the night, especially when firewood was scarce. It was the kind of quiet innovation that never made it into epic poems, but absolutely deserved a medal. The woman ladles you a small bowl, more a sample than a serving. It's thick, creamy, and surprisingly satisfying. Barley, leek, dried herbs, maybe a bit of salted pork if you're lucky. You take a bite. Your entire body sighs like it's been waiting for this moment since the Ice Age. She nods approvingly. Good. Yes. A warm belly makes the cold easier to forgive. You glance at the hearth again. The fire is nothing, just a few glowing embers arranged carefully like puzzle pieces. But she tends it with expert precision, adding exactly one handful of straw, 2 twigs of gorse, and a peat fragment the size of a walnut. The flames flare briefly, then settle back into a gentle smolder, the perfect level for slow cooking. Wood? She snorts. We don't waste wood on food. Wood is for real cold, for fevers, for babies. She gestures for you to follow her to a small side table where a row of clay jars sits. Each contains something that feels like a chapter from a medieval emergency cookbook. Dried beans that take hours to soften, rye flour for thickening pottages, cracked barley for bulk without expense, root vegetables wrinkled but still loyal, salted meat dried to the texture of medieval toenails, herbs that smell toenails, like they've been waiting all year for this exact moment. This isn't just cooking. It's survival strategy in culinary form. She takes the bundle of kindling and sets it aside, then grabs a large clay jug of water and sets it near the hearth, not on it, just near it. By morning, she explains, it'll thaw enough to drink. Historians still argue whether families preferred pottage because it was efficient or because they genuinely liked it. The debate has sparked dissertations, academic conferences, and at least one heated argument involving a monk, a cookbook, and a very disappointed audience. But sitting here with a full belly and warm hands, you get it. Food wasn't just nourishment. Food was warmth. Food was survival insurance. A child shuffles out from the sleeping corner, wrapped in a cloak like a disgruntled burrito. He eyes you suspiciously, then spots the pot simmering quietly and relaxes. He grabs a small metal disc from a shelf, a bed warmer, and passes it to his mother. She fills it with hot embers, closes the lid, and slips it under the blankets in the sleeping area. Instantly, the straw mattress steams slightly. She notices your surprise. Heat everything, she whispers. Stones, beds, water, food. Nothing must be cold if you can help it. You imagine trying to stay warm without insulated houses, electric blankets, or midnight access to microwavable leftovers. Suddenly, the medieval system seems brilliant. Every ember doing triple duty. Every warm object, a tiny battery storing precious heat. When you finally step back outside, the cold gnaws at your face again, but your stomach radiates warmth outward like a small internal campfire. You pull your cloak around you and walk on, snow drifting softly under a wide, star-heavy sky. And now you understand. When fuel was scarce, heat came from more than fire. It came from stews that simmered for hours, stones that carried heat through the night, drinks warmed by ember flicker, bed warmers filled with glowing coals, and calories conserved with precision. Medieval peasants weren't fighting winter. They were outsmarting it one bubbling pot at a time. You step back into the cold night, belly warm from the stew, cloak wrapped tightly around you, and for a brief moment you think, okay, maybe winter isn't so bad. Then the wind punches you in the ribs, like it overheard your optimism, and decided to correct you. Instantly your eyes water, your nose protests, and your fingers begin filing official complaints with your brain. But you push on, because tonight you're learning something crucial about medieval winter life. People didn't stay warm by sitting near fires. They stayed warm by moving, constantly, carefully, and just enough. You walk toward the village's edge, where a group of early risers, yes, even in pitch-black night, are beginning their chores. Their breaths puff into the air like little white lanterns. Their movements are slow, deliberate, and oddly rhythmic. This isn't exercise. This is survival. A tall man carrying a wooden yoke over his shoulders waves to you over. He's balancing two buckets that clink softly with a sound that definitely isn't water. Milk froze in the bucket, he grunts, going to break it loose. You blink. Milk, frozen into a solid chunk. Welcome to medieval dairy life. He laughs at your expression. Frozen milk still feeds a calf once thawed. Waste nothing in winter. You follow him to the barn, where he'll chip away at the icy lump and warm it just enough near a lantern so it can be used again. This is what winter work looks like. Not comfortable, not optional, but essential. A mainstream historical fact surfaces in your mind. Winter was far from a season of rest for medieval peasants. It was a season of controlled movement chores calibrated to keep the body warm without burning the day's limited calories. Too much movement equals burning fuel. You can't spare. Too little movement equals your fingers freeze into decorative icicles. Finding the balance was an art. A woman carrying a basket of grain trudges past. She lifts her skirt just slightly to keep it out of the snow, revealing thick woolen hose wrapped around her legs. She's headed to feed the chickens, even though the chickens look at her like they'd rather be hibernating. She tosses grain sparingly. The birds cluck their thanks with sleepy indignation. Next, you see a boy dragging a bundle of brushwood toward the animal pens. His breath fogs around him as he works, cheeks glowing with the kind of pink that only comes from freezing wind and mild resentment. He pauses to lean on the bundle. Father says, if I stop moving, I'll turn to ice before breakfast. Fair. You help him carry the bundle to the goats' shelter. The goats stare at you with the intense judgment only goats can muster. They huddle together, their warm breath fogging the air, reminding you that even animals rely on each other for warmth. Meanwhile, the boy grabs a broom and begins sweeping manure into a pile. Gotta get it drying. Early, if we want it to burn later, he explains. You blink. Even in winter? Especially in winter. A quirky tidbit pops into your memory. Manure doesn't stop accumulating just because the world outside has become a frozen apocalypse. Winter dung was often piled under small roofs or lean-tos so cold winds could dry it, making it usable as fuel later. It's the medieval version of stocking up on batteries before a storm. You continue through the village, noticing how every task seems designed to warm the worker just enough. Chopping ice for water breaks a sweat. Hauling feed keeps shoulders warm. Mending clothes warms your lap. Hammering wooden tools warms arms and hands. Sweeping floors warms the whole body. But none of it is vigorous enough to make weak someone overly hungry. Historians still argue whether peasants planned their winter workload deliberately for warmth, or whether it evolved naturally. Some scholars believe winter work was designed to match the consummand season's caloric limits. Others argue that necessity dictated the rhythm, not strategy. Either way, these people move with the precision of families who have survived generations of winter. You watch an older man mend a wooden rake by the faint glow of a horn-covered lantern. His posture is relaxed, movement steady. It takes longer than it would in summer, but the slow pace keeps his fingers warm without exhausting him. You sit beside him, rubbing your hands together. He glances over and chuckles. Cold hands, warm heart, he says. You smile back. Warm heart isn't doing much for my fingers. Then move, he replies. Stillness freezes. He hands you a wooden peg and gestures toward a small pile of broken tools. You help him sort them, nothing too delicate, nothing requiring precision, just enough movement to keep your blood flowing. When you finally stand up again, your back is warm, your legs awake, your face tingling from the barn's relative warmth. You step outside, and the cold grabs you again, but it doesn't sink in quite as fast now. You realize these winter tasks don't just maintain the village, they maintain the villagers. Every chore is a gentle conversation with the cold, a negotiation, a truce. Fire is precious. Food is limited. Warmth must be earned with measured, rhythmic work. As you walk back toward the village center, you notice something else. No one wastes a movement. No unnecessary gestures. No idle strolling. Every step has purpose. Every task a double benefit. You pull your cloak close and breathe deeply. Even your breath feels warmer now. Winter hasn't changed, but you have. A little movement, a little sweat, a little rhythm to your day, and suddenly the cold doesn't feel quite so invincible. Medieval peasants worked just enough to stay warm, and never enough to starve. Their winter was a dance, slow and steady. And now you're moving to the same ancient rhythm. You walk back toward the center of the village with a new respect for how movement alone can keep a body from freezing solid. But as you approach the cottages again, something hits your nose, something sharp, acrid, almost metallic, and instantly, you know you've reached the next unavoidable truth of medieval winter. The cold didn't just bite, the smoke did too. A thin grey cloud seeps from nearly every roof, curling into the night air and settling low, trapped by the frigid stillness. You breathe in and immediately cough. Your throat tightens, your eyes prickle. The air isn't just cold, it's dirty. You push open the door of a nearby cottage, and the smoke inside hugs you like a clingy ex who refuses to take a hint. It's everywhere, coating walls, hovering under the rafters, swirling lazily around the fire. A woman tending the hearth waves you in through the haze. Close the door, she croaks good-naturedly. Smoke gets jealous when there's a draft. You step inside. The warmth is weak, but the raven, smoke is robust, like it pays rent here. A mainstream historical fact floats to the surface. Indoor air pollution was one of the most persistent hazards of medieval life, especially in winter. Houses had tiny windows, poor ventilation, and low-drawing chimneys. When chimneys existed at all, fires were weak, smouldering, and fueled by smoke-prone materials like peat, dung, straw, and scrub brush. You blink hard. Tears run down your cheeks. The woman laughs and hands you a rag to wipe your eyes. It stings the first few years, she says cheerfully. The first few years? Great. You sit on a stool near the hearth, and almost immediately you feel the smoke cling to your cloak, your hair, your very soul. It smells earthy, oily, sour, and oddly familiar, like someone tried to roast garden soil inside a closet. The woman stirs the fire, adding a peat brick. More smoke billows out. Good fuel, she says. Burns long. Smoke keeps bugs out. She beams proudly. Meanwhile, your lungs are filing a formal complaint. Children sit nearby, used to it. A baby sleeps in a cradle, swaddled tightly and blissfully unaware that her respiratory system is currently being marinated. A quirky tidbit flickers into your mind. Some medieval households hung meat or cheese high in the rafters to smoke cure it. Not intentionally, but simply because everything stored up there absorbed the constant fumes. You look up. The rafters are glossy with soot, gleaming like someone painted them with tar. You cough again, deep, involuntary, chest rattling. The woman pats your back. You'll get used to it, she says. You're not entirely convinced. Historians still argue whether medieval people simply tolerated smoke or whether they genuinely believed it strengthened the body. Some manuscripts hint at the idea that smoke toughened the lungs or protected the humours. Others describe chronic coughs and blackened mucus with alarming casualness. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. People adapted because they had no choice. The smoke thickens as the fire shifts, swirling in lazy spirals that catch the firelight in hypnotic patterns. If smoke had a personality, this smoke is the passive-aggressive type. Never in a hurry, always in your way, silently judging. You watch how the family navigates the room with practiced ease. They sit low, close to the fire, but not directly above the smoke. They keep the door shut at all costs. They avoid standing up too quickly, because the upper air is an eye-watering disaster zone. They use the smoky rafters to preserve herbs, meats, and even baskets. It's half survival strategy, half lifestyle choice, half we don't have better options, which is mathematically troubling but historically accurate. A boy brings over a small clay pot filled with animal fat. He dips a rag into it, lights it using a spark from the fire, and sets it in a niche in the wall. It flickers weakly, adding to the room's unbothered miasma. You rub your eyes. They sting relentlessly. The back of your throat feels coated. You shift closer to the fire, but the smoke follows as if magnetized to your existence. The woman sits beside you, warming her hands. You can tell a rich house by the smell, she says. You raise an eyebrow. Less smoke? More wood, she says. Wood burns clean, peat burns proud. You chuckle despite yourself. Another gust of smoke hits you square in the face. You cough so hard your ribs vibrate. The woman nods approvingly. You're learning. Eventually, you step back outside into the open air. You inhale deeply, gratefully, then choke again, because the entire village is wrapped in a soft, smoky blanket. Chimneys puff like old men sighing. Smoke drifts lazily, settling into clothes, hair, and lungs. The sky glows faintly orange above the rooftops where embers burn in dozens of small hearths. For the first time, you realize medieval winter wasn't just cold. It was heavy. A physical thing. A mixture of frost, breath, soot, fire, and human determination hanging in the air. Your cloak smells like peat dung straw smoke casserole. Your throat feels scratchy. Your eyes water every few seconds. But beneath it all, you understand the truth. Warmth always had a cost. And for medieval peasants, that cost was lungs coated in soot, rafters blackened with smoke, and eyes perpetually stinging. Fire kept you alive. Smoke reminded you of the price. You step away from the smoky cottage, blinking hard as the cold night air rushes into your lungs like a cleansing tide. It feels sharp, almost medicinal. Your throat is grateful, your eyes even more so. But the relief doesn't last long. The cold closes around you again, wrapping itself tight, reminding you that warmth in winter was precious and often communal. Which brings you to one of the most quietly brilliant survival tactics medieval peasants used every single winter. They went where the heat already was: churches, taverns, workshops, hearth-sharing houses. Anywhere bodies, candles, and small fires gathered. You follow the sound of faint laughter drifting down a narrow street. The glow ahead comes from a doorway thrown wide, letting warmth spill into the snow like golden smoke. You approach a small tavern more, a big wooden room with ambitions. And the moment you step inside, the atmosphere changes entirely. It isn't hot, not by modern standards, but compared to the lethal air outside, it feels like walking into a medieval spa. Warm breath, warm bodies, warm ale, warm gossip. A living, breathing heat machine. People glance your way, nodding as you close the door quickly, because letting the cold linger is considered a minor act of war. You're immediately struck by how crowded it is. At least 24 villagers are inside, huddled around a central hearth that glows a steady orange. Candles flicker from shelves. Clay mugs steam gently in people's hands. A mainstream historical fact floats up. Public buildings, especially taverns and churches, acted as unofficial warming stations throughout winter. People visited them not only for socializing, but because they were often the only places where larger fires could be maintained. A rotund fellow with a beard like a confused sheep pats a seat beside him. Sit, warm yourself. Your face looks like it tried to freeze off and failed. You sit, and instantly you feel heat seep into your bones. Not the sharp heat of gorse or the smoky heat of peat, this is shared heat. The warmth of dozens of bodies, intermingled with candlelight, firelight, and the lingering smell of ale. A serving girl passes with a jug of warm cider. She offers you a small cup. "On the house for frozen souls," she says. You take a sip. It tastes like apples, cloves, and pure relief. Around you, people talk in soft, tired voices, laughing lightly, sharing stories, complaining about the cold with the energy of professionals. Someone near the hearth plucks a lute, the strings buzzing gently. A young couple leans close to share a cloak. A few men dust snow from their boots, letting it melt in muddy puddles beneath their stools. The air here feels thick, alive, and buzzing with human warmth. Even the smoke is less aggressive, rising predictably into a stone-hooded chimney built for larger fires, a luxury few homes could afford. You ask the bearded fellow, "Do people come here every night?" He snorts. "Only the ones who want to keep their noses on their faces." He leans in conspiratorially. "And the ones who owe my wife 6 chickens but won't come home till they forget the debt." A quirky tidbit flickers into memory. Some medieval taverns were known not just for drinks but for their warming hearths, where travelers paid a tiny fee simply to sit by the fire. The tavern keepers didn't mind bodies meant business. Smoke meant company. And heat meant survival. But taverns weren't the only warm public spaces. You leave after your cider and decide to visit the church next. The stone building looms in the moonlight, frost clinging to its edges like lace. Inside, candles flicker in iron sconces, their flames glowing gently over rows of heavy wooden pews. It's quiet, peaceful, warmer than you expect. Not because the church has a giant fire, it doesn't, but because people have been here all day, praying, attending small services, and simply existing together. You sit on a bench. The wood is still warm from the congregation earlier. The air smells like beeswax candles, and the lingering presence of dozens of bodies. A monk sweeping the floor glances at you with a kind smile. "Cold outside tonight?" You nod. "Very." He gestures around. "Come here when it gets too strong. The Lord warms all who enter." You suspect the Lord gets help from 100 candles and 100 bodies, but you appreciate the gesture. Historians still argue whether medieval churches intentionally acted as winter warming stations, or whether that role evolved out of necessity. Most agree. People gathered at churches more in winter, not just for worship, but to escape cold cottages and stretch out precious firewood. As you walk back into the night, the cold feels less hostile now, but only because you carry the memory of shared warmth with you. You wander toward another building at the edge of the village, a carpenter's workshop. A faint glow seeps from the cracks of its shuttered windows. You step inside and find 2 men sanding a plank by lantern light. One sits near a brazier filled with hot coals, warming his fingers between strokes of his carving knife. "Come in," one says. Close the door. We're not heating the whole village. Fair. The brazier's heat radiates outward like a small sun. Tools glint in the warmth. Wood curls peel from the plank like ribbons. You realize that for medieval peasants, community spaces didn't just provide warmth, they provided purpose. Chores, repairs, worship, gossip, music, cooking, drinking. Winter wasn't endured alone unless absolutely necessary. As you step back outside once more, the snow crunches under your boots. The cold fills your lungs. But the warmth you carry within, borrowed from taverns, churches, workshops, and human closeness, makes it easier to bear. Because here's the truth. Fire warms the room. People warm the world. And medieval peasants, facing the winter determined to kill them, leaned on community as much as coal, peat, straw, or dung. In the coldest season, the warmest places were wherever people gathered. You leave the carpenter's workshop behind, stepping once more into the night that seems determined to nibble on every exposed inch of your skin. The cold settles around you like a heavy cloak, but as you walk, something strange happens. Your body feels okay, not warm, certainly not comfortable, but capable. And that's when you realize the next truth of medieval winter. Clothing wasn't fashion, it was engineering. A full-body survival system built from wool, linen, fur, and pure stubbornness. You make your way toward a house, with light spilling through a sliver of oiled cloth window. A woman stands outside, beating snow off freshly washed garments. If freshly washed means soaked in lukewarm water, scrubbed lightly, and prayed over. She sees you shivering, and laughs softly. "You're layered wrong," she says. You look down at your carefully arranged medieval cosplay, and feel vaguely offended. "I'm wearing 5 layers." She shakes her head. "And they're all the wrong 5. She gestures you inside, and the moment you step through the door, you're greeted by the familiar smell of wool, wet, dry, warm, scratchy, comforting, sheepish. Wool in every mood. A mainstream historical fact floats up. Medieval layering was a science long before modern outdoor gear existed. Wool for warmth, linen for breathability, fur for extreme cold, and clothes arranged in a specific order to trap heat and let moisture escape. The woman pulls out a pile of garments and lays them on a table. She points to the inner layer. A linen shift, soft, breathable, perfect for wicking moisture before it chills the skin. "You always start with linen," she says. "It keeps sweat from freezing against you." That sentence alone tells you everything you need to know about winter. Next, she lifts a thick garment woven from heavy wool. This is the kirtle. Holds heat, keeps the wind out. You touch it. It's dense, sturdy, slightly rough. The kind of material that would absolutely survive a winter apocalypse and then go on to raise a family. Then she holds up another wool tunic, slightly looser, heavier. This traps the warmth from the first 2 layers and gives the air somewhere to stay. Air. Insulation. That's the secret. Medieval people weren't wearing clothing. They were wearing microscopic heat pockets. A quirky tidbit pops into your mind. Well-off medieval people sometimes stuffed wool garments with loose fleece or added quilted stitching to trap warm air, early versions of padded jackets. Peasants did the same with scraps of cloth, moss, or tow. The woman wraps a long wool hood, a liripipe, around your shoulders, then your head. "This keeps your ears," she says. "You have never been more grateful for anything in your entire medieval life." She layers a cloak over that thick, felted, almost as heavy as you. She fastens it with a brooch. The weight presses into your shoulders, and suddenly your body feels insulated, protected, held. You breathe out, and for the first time, the cold doesn't instantly reclaim your lungs. The woman grins. "See? You were letting all your heat escape. You need to trap it." Historians still argue whether medieval clothing was intentionally engineered for thermal efficiency or just happened to work that way thanks to natural materials. But anyone who's ever worn a full wool outfit knows the heat is real, the sweat is real, and the resilience is medievally unmatched. She pulls out a pair of foot coverings, thick wool socks, long enough to wrap around your calves several times. "Wear these to bed," she says. "Your toes will thank you in the morning." Next, she shows you mittens, simple felted wool tubes with thumb pockets. Gloves lose heat between the fingers. Mittens keep it. You slip them on. They're warm, cozy, and make you feel like an overgrown toddler. You love them instantly. A child runs over wearing an outfit that resembles a portable hay bale. He's wrapped in so many layers you can't find his elbows. He beams proudly. "Look," he chirps. "Mama made me winterproof." He lifts his arms, and his entire body tilts like a rigid board. You laugh. "Can you move?" "No," he says cheerfully. His mother shrugs. He doesn't need to run. He only needs to stay warm. Fair point. Before you leave, the woman shows you her winter trick. She lines her cloak with rabbit skins sewn inward, so the fur touches her inner layers. "That way," she says, "your body heats the fur, and the fur heats you back." A medieval feedback loop of cozy thermodynamics. You step outside again, and the cold hits your face, but stops at your collar. It tries to penetrate your layers, and fails. It tries to reach your fingers, and fails. It tries to crawl up your sleeves, and fails. You walk through the snowy village feeling like a well-insulated human fortress. Your body radiates a small, steady warmth. Your breath fogs gently in front of you. Your toes feel almost smug. And suddenly you understand. Medieval peasants didn't just survive winter. They engineered themselves against it. With linen against the skin, wool against the cold, fur against the wind, and layers arranged like a shield. You pull your cloak tighter, not from fear, but from mastery. For the first time, you feel dressed for this world. Not stylish, not glamorous, but warm. And here, warmth is everything. You walk through the village now, with your new medieval layering system wrapped around you, like a personal fortress. But even the best wool in the world can't protect you from every winter misery. Because as you trudge between cottages, a new sensation creeps in, something sharp, irritating, and unmistakably awful. Your skin feels like it's cracking. Your lips sting. Your knuckles burn. Your cheeks feel stretched tight, as if they might split under the wind's next insult. And that's when you realize the next hard truth of medieval winter. Even if you kept warm, you couldn't keep your skin safe. Frostbite, cracked hands, windburn, and winter infections were constant threats, and peasants fought them with remedies both clever and very questionable. You duck into a cottage lit by the faint glow of a single tallow candle. Inside, a woman sits near the hearth, rubbing something thick and oily onto her hands. Her fingers look raw and swollen, bright red from cold and rough work. "Close the door," she murmurs, without looking up. "Not letting the wind finish me off today." You sit beside her, and instantly the warmth of the fire reaches your hands, which tingle painfully as they thaw. She examines your knuckles and gives a sympathetic click of her tongue. You're splitting. Happens to everyone this time of year. Here, she scoops some of the salve from her pot and gently rubs it onto your hands. It's warm, sticky, and smells faintly like beef stew. "What's in this?" you ask. She shrugs. "Animal fat. Goose grease, if I have it. Sometimes tallow. Better than letting your skin fall off." A mainstream historical fact rises in your mind. Before petroleum jelly, before fancy moisturizers, medieval people used animal fats as their primary winter skin treatment. Goose grease, lard, tallow, dripping anything oily was smeared on hands, faces, even feet, to keep the skin from cracking. The woman gestures to a small pot by the fire. "That one's for lips, beeswax and oil, keeps them from bleeding." You touch your lips, yep, they hurt. She hands you a bit of the mixture. You dab it on experimentally. It tastes like sadness but works instantly. Nearby, a young man sits with his boots off, feet stretched toward the fire. His toes are an alarming shade of white, then red, then mottled purplish. You wince. He gives you a sheepish grin. "Fell asleep by the door. Cold found me before morning did." The woman scolds him. "You're lucky it didn't take your toes." He shrugs, unbothered. "Still got them all. Might name one Frosty the wrong toe." A quirky tidbit surfaces. Medieval people knew frostbite existed, even if they didn't call it that. They described dead fingers, fire-bitten skin, or winter's bite. Treatments varied. Warm water, warm cloths, prayer, rubbing with snow, not a great idea. Or, if things got bad enough, letting the skin slough off on its own. You look closer, as the woman rubs his feet with a paste of warmed oil and crushed herbs. Does that help? You ask. He winces. Feels like getting massaged by an angry hedgehog. But better than losing a toe. The woman scoffs. If you lose a toe, it's your own fault for sleeping like a stone by the draft hole. You notice now something you hadn't before: the floor itself is frozen in places. Thin sheets of ice creep inward from the walls, glittering faintly in the candlelight. Even inside, the cold is enemy territory. The woman reaches for another pot and lifts the lid, releasing a strong herbal scent: wild rosemary, sage, and something sharp. This one's for the lungs, she explains. The smoke hurts, so we breathe the herbs. Helps with coughs. Sure enough, she brings the pot close to her face and inhales the steam deeply. Eyes closed, hands cupped around it. It's the medieval version of Vicks VapoRub, a warm, fragrant cloud of relief. Historians still argue whether these herbal remedies actually reduced infections or simply soothed symptoms. Some say rosemary and sage had antibacterial properties. Others argue the real benefit was psychological warmth and hydration. The debate endures like a centuries-old tug-of-war between science and tradition. But as you watch her breathe in the steaming herbs, you see her shoulders relax. And in winter, that alone is a kind of healing. A child crawls out of the sleeping nook, rubbing her eyes. She scratches at her arms, which are red and irritated from cold and wool friction. The woman sighs. Dry skin again. Hold still. She applies a thin coat of warmed pork fat to the girl's arms. The child makes a face. It smells like supper. It keeps your skin from peeling, the woman replies firmly. But it smells like supper. That's because you're lucky. Some children only get sheep tallow. You can't help but laugh. Meanwhile, the child sighs dramatically, smelling herself as though her social life has just been ruined. You glance around the cottage and notice bundles of dried herbs hanging from the rafters. Chamomile, thyme, yarrow, lavender, and something that looks suspiciously like a small, shriveled root wearing a bad wig. What's that one for, you ask? The woman leans in. Wind spirit sickness. You blink. Meaning? Meaning the cold gets inside you, leaves you weak, lightheaded, makes the bones ache. Ah, hypothermia. Medieval diagnosis. The wind is trying to move into your skeleton. Medieval treatment. Hang herbs and hope for the best. You admire it, genuinely. Before you leave, she hands you a small lump wrapped in linen. Keep this close to your chest, she says. Rendered fat mixed with juniper. Rub it on your skin before the cold cracks it. The bundle is soft, warm, comforting. When you step outside again, the cold hits like a slap, but it doesn't steal your breath this time. The fat salve on your hands forms a protective layer. Your cheeks sting less. Your lips don't scream. You walk through the village with the faint smell of rosemary, juniper, and roasted sheeptail following you. And it dawns on you. Medieval peasants survived winter not with luxury, but with ritual, with recipes and remedies passed down through generations, with oils, fats, herbs, and stubborn dedication. Winter cracked the skin. They mended it. Winter bit the fingers. They warmed them back to life. Winter chapped the lips and burned the cheeks. They smeared, steeped, and soothed. Their bodies weren't just fighting the cold. They were collaborating with it. And every pot of fat, every herbal tea, every salve warmed on the hearth was a quiet promise. We will not let winter take us easily. You step back out into the night, the juniper fat salve still warming your skin, and the cold greets you with a kind of slow, patient cruelty, no longer a slap, but a steady pressure, like winter testing your defenses. You pull your cloak tighter and look toward the far end of the village, where the houses thin out and the darkness grows heavier. Because now you're walking into the part of medieval winter most people preferred not to think about. When the cold didn't just hurt fingers or crack skin, it killed. Quietly. Quickly. Often. And no amount of wool, peat, dung, or clever kitchen tricks could stop certain winters from becoming monsters. You follow a narrow track leading toward a cottage built slightly apart from the others. A dim lantern glows in the window. Before you reach the door, a man steps out, wrapped in 3 cloaks and a hood so deep you can barely see his face. He nods slowly. You here to help the sick? You blink. Sick? Winter always brings. He gestures for you to enter. Inside, a woman lies on a straw-stuffed bed, wrapped tightly in blankets. She isn't coughing. She isn't moving much at all. Her breath comes shallow and uneven. A small clay pot sits beside her, filled with herbs steeping in water barely warm. This is the hunger sickness, the man says quietly. Cold takes the food from your body faster than you can eat it. A mainstream historical fact chills you more than the weather. Winters during the medieval period were often linked with famine. Crops failed, food stores dwindled, and livestock died from exposure, disease, or lack of fodder. When calories ran out, the body shut down. Slowly, horribly. The man holds his hands over the dying fire. We saved our wood for nights like this, but the cold is stronger this year. He tosses a dung cake onto the embers. It smoulders weakly. We burned everything, he whispers. Sticks, straw, even the old thatch. But the wind keeps stealing our heat. You look at the woman again. Her hands are cold, pale, stiff around the edges. It's not frostbite, it's winter's deeper cruelty. The slow, merciless draining of strength. The child sits in the corner, knees pulled to her chest, whispering a prayer under her breath. You recognize some of the words, something about protection from the dark season, something about keeping breath safe. A quirky tidbit nudges your memory. Many medieval people believed winter wasn't just cold, it was spiritually dangerous. They thought evil spirits prowled the frost, hunting the weak, stealing warmth and breath. Some households placed charms or hung certain herbs to ward off winter demons. You glance at the rafters. Sure enough, bundles of garlic, rosemary, and rowan twigs hang overhead like talismans against the icy unknown. The man sees your eyes wandering. Old superstitions, he mutters. But in winters like this, we trust everything. You step outside with him, into the biting air. He points toward the distant tree line where snow drifts swirl like restless spirits. This cold, it isn't normal. It feels like the bad years. You've heard whispers about these bad years all night, but now someone explains. Sometimes, he says, winter comes harder than it should. The wind sharper, the nights longer, the sun weaker, the animals thin, the grain sours, and people. He hesitates, searching for the right words. People go to sleep and don't wake. Historians still argue whether certain winters were made worse by volcanic eruptions, solar anomalies, or shifts in ocean currents. Some point to the early centuries of the Little Ice Age. Others point to failed crops, disease cycles, or plain bad luck. But all agree. Periods of intense cold pushed entire villages to the brink. You walk with the man toward the barn where the livestock huddle. A cow lies on its side, ribs visible even in the dim lantern light. Its breath comes in small clouds. A goat nudges it gently, as if urging it to stand. Lost 2 sheep last week, the man says bitterly. Cold came early, grass died too soon. Feed won't last through spring. Food gone, firewood gone, clothes worn thin, animals dying, people starving. You feel a heaviness settle in your chest that has nothing to do with smoke or frost. The man pulls a small silver cross from under his cloak and holds it to his mouth. Pray for us, he whispers, not to you, but to the air, as though hoping winter might hear and show mercy. He turns to you with hollow eyes. You've seen how we burn dung and straw and peat. But when winter turns cruel, it isn't fuel that decides who survives. You swallow. What does? He answers without hesitation. Luck. Then, softer. And faith. Back inside the cottage, the child still prays softly. The woman's breath grows fainter. The fire flickers, struggling. The shadows pulse with each movement of the flame. This part of winter was the one peasants feared most. The point where survival wasn't a matter of fuel or clothing, but fate. You step outside again, the cold swallowing you whole. The stars above glitter, brutally, indifferent to the suffering below. The man closes his door gently, as though afraid to disturb the darkness. And suddenly you understand. Medieval winter wasn't just cold. It was a crisis. A test. A thief. And for many, it was the line between life and death. You pull your cloak tighter as you walk away from the man's cottage, the weight of his words trailing behind you like a second shadow. The cold feels different now, not just sharp or biting, but ancient, watchful, as if the night itself is remembering something. And that's when the next truth settles into your bones. This wasn't just a cold winter. Sometimes, the world slipped into winters that were colder, longer, and harsher than any living person could remember. Sometimes, the climate itself turned against them. You stop at the top of a small rise overlooking the village. The rooftops look hunched under the weight of frost, chimneys struggling to send smoke upward through the heavy air. Snowdrifts shift in the moonlight like pale dunes. Every sound seems muffled, absorbed by the cold, and you realize you're stepping into the story of the Little Ice Age. A period when temperatures dropped across Europe, crops failed more often, rivers froze deeper, storms grew wilder, and winters became something closer to a force of nature. A mainstream historical fact echoes in your mind. Between the 1300s and 1600s, Europe experienced a cluster of colder-than-normal centuries, due in part to volcanic eruptions, solar minima, shifting ocean currents, and natural climate variability. Peasants didn't know the science, but they felt the consequences. You hear the crunch of footsteps behind you. A woman approaches, carrying a bundle of frost-tipped herbs and a lantern dimmed by a sheet of icy film. Her face is lined, not just with age, but with years of winters that pushed entire communities close to the edge. "You're out late," she says softly. "Couldn't sleep." She nods. "Cold years do that." She gestures for you to follow her toward a larger hall at the village center, one used for meetings, harvest gatherings, and occasional celebrations. Tonight, it's filled with families seeking warmth. The air inside isn't warm, but it's warmer than outside. A dozen candles struggle against the dark, their flames trembling in the draft. "Our grandparents had easier winters," she says as she sets down her herbs. "Less wind, more sun, fewer storms." Her voice lowers, but then the cold years came. You sit with her near a basin of half-frozen water. She broke the ice on top only moments ago, and already it's beginning to crust over again. "I remember the year the river froze so hard," she continues. "You could walk from one side to the wood, other, as if it were a road." You raise your eyebrows. She nods. "And the year after, it froze so deep, they built a fair on top, fires, stalls, music, cold above, cold below, but the people danced anyway." A quirky tidbit snaps into place. During especially cold years of the Little Ice Age, the River Thames in London froze solid enough to host frost fairs, markets and festivals held directly on the ice. People roasted meat, raced horses, and even printed commemorative frost fair tickets using printing presses set up on the frozen river. But peasants didn't get frost fairs. Peasants got frost famines. The woman's voice turned solemn. And then there were the years when nothing grew. We called them the hungry winters. Snow in spring, frost in summer, rains that never stopped. Historians still argue whether the worst of these years were triggered by large volcanic eruptions, like the 1,257 Samalas eruption in Indonesia, or the 1,452 over 53 Kauai eruption that darkened the skies and cooled the climate. Others argue solar cycles played a bigger role. But standing here, listening to her speak, the cause seems secondary to the suffering. "Some winters," she whispers, "some winters felt like the sun had abandoned us." You look around the hall. People sit together in tight clusters, families, neighbors, the elderly wrapped in thick cloaks. Someone is singing softly in the corner, a lullaby meant to soothe restless children. The fire in the hearth is little more than a tired glow, barely enough to warm the room, but nobody complains. The woman continues arranging her herbs, her hands trembling slightly. "We learned to read the cold. The year the berries shriveled early, we knew trouble was coming. The year the geese left too soon, we knew the winter would be bad. And the year the wind changed direction." She shudders. "That was the winter we lost half the valley." You sit with her in silence, the weight of history settling heavily around you. The idea that winter could last longer than memory, harsher than imagination, strikes you deep. The woman folds her hands. "People think winter is the enemy," she says softly. "But winter is only dangerous when the world forgets to warm itself." You frown. "What does that mean?" She gives a small smile. It means we survive together, villages, families, communities. When the cold years come, we hold each other through them. The winters are only deadly when we lose each other. And suddenly, it makes perfect, aching sense. You step outside after the hall grows quiet. The village sleeps beneath the stars, wrapped in snow. The air is crisp, almost brittle. Frost sparkles like tiny shards of glass scattered across rooftops. You breathe in the frozen night and feel the full truth settle in your chest. This wasn't just weather. It was climate shifting beneath people's feet. An era when winter dug deeper, stayed longer, struck harder. And peasants did what people have always done. They endured. They adapted. They held on. Through hunger. Through bitter cold. Through years when even spring felt uncertain. This is the story of winter not as a season, but as a force that shaped lives and carved history into the bones of entire generations. You walk away from the communal hall with the woman's words echoing in your mind. Winters are only deadly when we lose each other. But as you step back into the cold and make your way toward the heart of the village, you start to realize something else. Even when people did hold together, even when they shared heat, food, labor, and prayer, winter still forced them into a delicate, sometimes painful hierarchy. Because not everyone got equal access to the fire, and that brings you to tonight's next truth. Medieval villages had unspoken rules, social, practical, and brutally pragmatic, about who got warm and who shivered by the door. You approach a small cottage glowing faintly from within. When you enter, the first thing you notice isn't the warmth, it's the arrangement. Everything in the room seems positioned according to invisible lines of importance. A small fire smolders in the hearth. Around it, people sit in a loose ring, some close enough to feel heat on their shins, others far enough back that they might as well be sitting outdoors. A woman beckons you forward. Find a place. Not too close. We keep the spots for the elders. You obey, taking a seat a respectful distance from the hearth, and slowly, you see how the room works. The elderly sit nearest the fire. They're fragile, prone to cold, and considered anchors of the family. Young children sit close as well, because little bodies lose heat fast. Adult men and women hover slightly farther away, stronger, warmer, capable of enduring longer stretches without direct heat. Teenagers and young helpers sit near the door, ready to jump up and work, fetch fuel, or shoo out drafts. The woman notices your curiosity and smiles faintly. Everyone knows their place in winter. A mainstream historical fact flickers through your mind. In medieval households, seating arrangements weren't random. They reflected duty, status, and survival needs. The closer you sat to the fire, the more vital or vulnerable you were. A thin old man near the hearth picks up a spoon with trembling fingers. They put me here after my frostbite, he says. Lost the feeling in 2 toes. Not losing more. You nod. It makes sense. Fire is life. Fire is triage. A teenage boy stomps in from outside, snow dusting his shoulders. The cold bursts into the cottage like an uninvited guest. In an instant, everyone turns to glare at him. Door. Several voices snap. He hurriedly closes it, and then takes his seat farthest from the hearth. Not as punishment, but as protocol. He's young, strong, resilient. His job is to fetch heat, not absorb it. Another subtle rule emerges. Whoever works outside sits in the coldest spots inside. Their body heat is already stirred up. Their clothes are damp. If they sat too close to the fire, they might sweat, and sweat in winter is a death sentence. A small girl hands the boy a warm stone wrapped in cloth bedstone style. He presses it to his chest with grateful relief. You watch a moment longer. The arrangement feels almost choreographed. Those who must stay warm do. Those who can handle the cold do. Those who work give up heat so the weak can keep it. Those who rest hold still to conserve every flicker of warmth. A quirky historical tidbit drifts in. In some northern regions, families even used fire turns, where people rotated toward the hearth in timed intervals, so everyone got a moment of direct warmth. Like a medieval version of musical chairs, but the prize was not freezing your eyebrows off. Suddenly, the cottage door creaks again. A neighbor steps in, a middle-aged woman carrying a basket of dried herbs. She offers them to your host with a small bow. "For the little one's cough," she murmurs. Your host accepts gratefully. The woman sits near the back, far from the fire. She doesn't live in this house. She's technically a guest, and as the unspoken rules dictate, guests do not take prime heat unless invited. You shift subtly in your seat. This warmth, this small, precious pool of heat, it's rationed like treasure. Historians still argue whether these winter seating customs were driven more by practicality or cultural norms. Some believe it was strict necessity. Others think social hierarchy played a bigger role. The truth is probably a blend of both survival wrapped in tradition. A baby begins to fuss. Instantly, the mother lifts him and carries him closer to the fire. No one protests. No one questions. Heat flows according to need, not fairness. Your eyes drift toward the hearthstones. They're cracked with age, polished by generations of desperate hands. A small iron pot boils faintly over the embers, just enough to warm a drink, not enough to waste fuel. A man near the door shifts uncomfortably, rubbing his hands together for warmth. He glances once toward the fire, then looks away. He knows his place. You realize this isn't cruelty. It's triage. A constant recalibration of heat distribution. The woman beside you leans over. "You see how we sit?" You nod. "That's how we survive." Winter is not the time to be proud. People laugh softly at a small joke someone cracks about earning fire privileges through good behavior. The mood lightens, but the rules remain. And as you sit there, halfway between warmth and cold, you feel a strange respect grow inside you. Medieval winter wasn't just a battle with the elements. It was a dance with rules, rituals, customs, and quiet sacrifices. Not everyone got equal warmth, but everyone got some warmth, because that was the only way a family, a village, community could make it to spring. When you finally stand to leave, the cold bites again, but the memory of that fire's fragile glow follows you, gentle and human. Warmth wasn't just fuel. It was shared strategy. A careful balance between need, strength, and mercy. And in winter, that balance meant survival. You leave the cottage with its carefully negotiated warmth hierarchy, stepping once more into the icy night. The cold greets you instantly, slipping into the seams of your cloak like a mischievous spirit. But something else drifts through the air now, something softer, warmer, gentler than fire or wool. Sound. From across the village, faint voices rise and fall beneath the star-heavy sky. Laughter, murmurs. The low hum of a dozen people gathered around a single hearth. It draws you like a beacon. Because if there's one thing medieval peasants knew better than almost anyone, it's this. When the night is freezing and the fuel is nearly gone, stories keep the soul warm long after the fire fades. You follow the sound into a longhouse near the village edge, a place where several families sometimes gather to share heat, food, and company. When you step inside, the warmth hits you gently, like a friendly nudge rather than a blazing welcome. A single, hard-working fire burns low at the center. Around it, people sit cross-legged on straw mats, wrapped in cloaks and blankets. A boy scoots over so you can sit. "You're just in time," he whispers. Old Brannan's starting a story. At the center, an elderly man with a beard like twisted frost lifts his hands for quiet. The flames flicker warmly across his face, casting him half in shadow, half in light. He begins. His voice is low, soothing, rhythmic, perfectly tuned for a night like this. He tells a story of a wandering knight who challenged the north wind to a contest of endurance. The knight lost, of course, but the north wind admired his bravery so much that it carved mountains in his honor. It's not logical, it's not historically accurate, and it absolutely doesn't matter, because stories like this are survival tools. A mainstream historical fact slips into your thoughts. In medieval Europe, storytelling wasn't just entertainment, it was a vital social glue. Oral tales carried history, instruction, morality, superstition, humor, and comfort through long, dark winters. The people around you lean in, mesmerized. The fire grows smaller, the cold grows stronger. But as long as the story continues, nobody seems to mind. A woman takes over next, telling a humorous tale about a farmer who tried to outsmart his own cow by dressing up as a wolf. Spoiler: it didn't go well for the farmer. The crowd laughs softly. Even in laughter, they conserve energy. No booming guffaws, just warm ripples of sound that spread like heat. Then a teenager chimes in with a story about lights that dance on the frozen lake at night. Spirits, she says, who guide lost travelers back home. The elders shake their heads, smiling knowingly. A quirky tidbit flickers into your memory. Medieval peasants believed in an array of night spirits: will-o'-the-wisps, house brownies, frost goblins, and wandering souls, and winter was their favorite season. Stories about them weren't just for fun. They explained strange lights, odd noises, and the unnerving sense of being watched by the cold. The teenager finishes her tale with a flourish, and the listeners murmur their approval. Now it's the children's turn. A small boy tells a story about a fox who stole a loaf of bread but generously shared it with a freezing hedgehog. The boy's voice is tiny, but the pride in it is enormous. His mother beams. You notice now that the fire is shrinking. The last peat brick gives a tired sigh as it collapses inward, glowing faintly. The room dims. The cold creeps closer, but the stories grow warmer. An older woman tells a tale of St. Brigid weaving a cloak so wide it covered all the poor in winter. Another man recounts a legend about a well that stayed warm all year, only to freeze the moment a lyre touched its water. Someone else shares a memory of a winter so harsh that people heard the snow singing at night, cracking like distant bells. Historians still argue whether such singing snow stories were exaggerations, or whether villagers really heard frost cracking in extreme cold. Some suggest thermal expansion. Others point to drifting snow on wooden roofs. The phenomenon remains mysterious, exactly the kind of thing medieval peasants would explain through myth. As the stories go on, your shoulders relax. The dark no longer feels as heavy. The cold no longer feels as cruel. The fire dwindles, but the warmth grows not from heat, but from connection. This is how peasants survived the long nights, not just with fuel, or layers, or clever engineering, but with meaning, with narrative, with a shared world woven through whispers and flickering light. When the final story ends, the fire is almost gone, just a cluster of faint embers glowing like sleepy fireflies. People stand slowly, stretch quietly, and help each other wrap their cloaks tighter. A little girl touches your arm. "You'll tell a story tomorrow night," she says confidently. Everyone tells one eventually. You smile. "I'll think of a good one." She beams. "It doesn't have to be good," she says. "It just has to be warm." You follow the others outside, stepping into the cold night once more. The stars glitter above like frozen sparks. Breath clouds the air. Snow crunches beneath your boots. But you carry warmth with you now, not from fire, but from stories, laughter, voices, and shared silence. In a world where winter wanted to break people, stories stitched them back together. You leave the long house with the sound of soft laughter still echoing in your ears. The cold greets you, but it feels different now. It's still sharp, still merciless, still nibbling at your nose, yes, but you've spent the entire night learning how medieval peasants fought it, shaped it, negotiated with it. And as you walk across the moonlit village square, the final truth settles on you like falling snow. Every tiny warmth you've felt tonight, every ember, every breath, every layer, every touch of community is a warmth you already know in your modern world. You just rarely notice it. Your boots crunch on the frozen ground as you head toward a small rise overlooking the village. From up here, you can see everything you've passed through tonight. The smoke curling from chimneys, thin, scrappy, determined. The glow of tavern windows like little islands of gold. The longhouse door now closed, but still humming with the memory of stories. The tiny cottages huddled like penguins, sharing walls to preserve heat. The bare fields, the dark hedgerows, the distant bogs. The lives stitched together by cold and by courage. You pull your cloak tighter, and the warmth of your layered medieval outfit holds firm. Your breath drifts into the sky like soft steam. And you realize something almost startling. For all of their hardships, medieval peasants weren't weak. They weren't pitiful. They weren't defeated. They were resilient in ways most modern people can barely imagine. A mainstream historical fact drifts into your mind. Medieval peasants lived in a world where winter wasn't a season, it was a test, and they passed that test every year with whatever tools they had: clothing, fuel, food, community, prayer, and inventiveness. You follow a snowy path down the slope until you reach the edge of a frozen stream. The ice glints in the moonlight like polished stone. You kneel and touch its surface. It stings your fingers even through your gloves, reminding you that the cold isn't just an inconvenience. It's a force. A group of villagers approach from behind you, carrying buckets. They chop at the ice with axes dull from overuse, breaking the surface so they can draw water for the next day. Their movements are slow, rhythmic, almost meditative. They greet you with sleepy nods. One woman, tired but smiling, says, "Another day soon. Spring always comes. It just takes its time." A quirky tidbit whispers into, "For your mind." Some medieval calendars didn't track the start of the year by dates, but by the first signs of thaw, the return of birdsong, or the softening of the earth beneath the frost. Winter and spring weren't just seasons, they were personalities, temperaments, moods. You watch your breath drift away into the night as the villagers finish their work. They pack the buckets into a sled and begin walking home, lantern bobbing gently like a moving star. You follow them at a distance as the village slowly settles into the quiet stillness of deep night. The cold grows sharper now, reminding you how far you've traveled in this story. Your footsteps crunch softly in the snow as you reach the center of the village again. A lone hut stands nearby, its hearth glowing faintly, a reminder that warmth persists even in the darkest hours. You pause, you breathe, you listen. The wind whispers through the trees like a tired storyteller. The stars blink softly overhead. The smoke from chimneys rises and fades, and as you stand there, wrapped in wool, stories, and centuries of human resilience, you feel an unexpected sense of connection, not just to the people you've met tonight, but to everyone who has ever faced a winter fueled by fear, scarcity, perseverance, and hope. Because, in a way, your own room, your own warm bed, your own quiet night, they all feel closer to this medieval world than you thought. Your heater hums quietly, your blankets are soft, your lights glow gently. You have comfort these peasants couldn't dream of. But their methods, their wisdom, their rhythms, their stories still shape how humans endure cold today. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the idea sink deep. You survive winter not just through heat, but through ritual, through connection, through small comforts, through the quiet persistence of being alive. And now, with the night still and the embers fading, your journey through this frozen medieval, the world reaches its soft conclusion. And now, as the village settles into its quiet winter breathing, you can let your own breath slow with it. You've walked through fields crusted with frost, felt the sting of smoke in your throat, sat close to tiny embers that worked far harder than they should. But all of that can fade now, softening at the edges like snow dissolving under early spring sun. Let the details loosen. Let the cold retreat. Let the warmth linger. Picture the village from a distance now, just a scattering of soft lights glowing through small windows, each one a gentle pulse against the dark. The smoke rises slowly, not hurried, drifting like a sigh into the quiet sky. You're standing far enough away now that the houses look like tiny lanterns, each one holding a story, a family, a moment of warmth carved from the deepest winter. Your body can relax into that image. Slow your shoulders, unclench your jaw. Let your hands rest softly, the way they did beside the hearth. You've traveled through cold landscapes, through hardships, through cleverness and community, and you've come out the other side with a fuller understanding of the quiet brilliance of human survival. And now there is nothing left for you to do but rest. The night is calm. The wind has gentled. Even the stars seem softer now, as though they've dimmed themselves just enough to let you drift. So let yourself settle. Let yourself breathe. Let sleep come in its own time. Slowly, quietly, like snowfall. You're warm. You're safe. And the long night outside can wait until morning.